So welcome everyone to the launch of Homo Novus by Gerard Cabrera. Gerard's been a longtime supporter of the Bureau, so we're so happy to have you launch your debut novel here. I think you've been with us pretty much from the beginning, back in 2012. My name is Greg Newton. I am the co-founder, along with my partner, Donnie Jochum, of the Bureau at General Services Queer Division, which is the room you find yourself in right now. Thank you. The Bureau, we like to say, is a government agency for a government that does not yet exist. And this is the service that we provide, is holding this space for queer culture. So we are a bookstore, a queer bookstore, but we also do lots of events, and we always have changing art exhibitions. So right now we have the wonderful show Satanic Panic by Catalina Schlievener-Munoz. There's been a lot of religion in the air for the past couple of weeks here at the Bureau, and we're happy to have some more Catholics back. What else did I want to say? We are an all-volunteer organization, so we depend on not only sales, but also donations to keep this project going. So we have a suggested donation of $10, but if money is tight and you are wanting to buy some books, you should hold on to your money and buy some books, especially Gerard's book. But I'll pass this around. If you're able to give something, great. If not, no worries. And there's change in here if you need it. I also wanted to let you know that we have an email list. So if you are not on that yet and you would like to be, you can sign up for that at the register, and you'll get an email every other Monday about our upcoming events. So now let's jump right in. I'm going to introduce the introducer, who will introduce Gerard formally. So Huascar Robles is a Puerto Rican author, journalist, photographer, musician who writes about economic, social justice, and LGBTQ+ issues in Puerto Rico, the Caribbean, and the US. His novel, Demonios, was recently published by Secta de los Perros in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Please welcome both Huascar and Gerard.
It is my absolute pleasure to present Gerard's book. First of all, thank you to the Bureau and Greg and Donnie. I've also been here several times, and this is a magical space for me. So to be able to present this, surrounded by all these beautiful authors around us, it's just one of the most beautiful moments I will take with me. And to present Gerard's book, it's very special. Also, thanks to the publisher, Rattling Good Yarns Press. And the audience, friends and family that came to visit us today, and those who are soon to know a little bit about this book, which will go into detail a lot. I know Gerard as a friend and as an author. He is the history of this book. It's very special to me because we were both working on the last drafts of our book simultaneously, and we kind of realized that both of our books had to do with the effect of religion on not just society but kids, and then how it indoctrinates, and then how that morphs into different other societal problems that we're going to discuss at length. But so I actually wanted to just talk about that religion and nationality. This is the topics that are overarching here. We live in a world that is dictated by either or both. This is certainly not the first instance in history in which religion is used as a propaganda or a means of outward mobility. But for minorities, and in this case, Puerto Ricans on the island and on the diaspora, religion becomes a tool to escape poverty, and mostly at the expense of children. Children are indoctrinated, are taught to fear or to be ashamed. And this book is a step towards healing, towards using the language to attain the experience of contrition, to turn the tables, to gain power and control the fear and the shame. With that said, I wanted to open with the very first scene in the book. It is, I think one of the attributes of this book is that Gerard uses innovative narrative style to both look into the depths of the issue of the abuse in the clergy, but also the psyche of the characters. And one of the main characters, it's having a very interesting hallucination at the beginning of the book. And when I remember reading this as a draft, and I was like, what's going on? And then I realized that there were two things happening at the same time. And it was beautiful to see how your brain starts to create those two parallel stories, because one of the attributes of the book is that it goes, between different time periods seamlessly. I should add. So you wouldn't mind reading a part of that first opening scene?
Sure, I will do that. Linus Fitzgerald listened to his wristwatch. It wasn't a ticking sound exactly, and he'd never noticed it before, but the second hand struck with a faint vibrato as if a tiny man trapped beneath the glass were trying to escape. Against the silence of the room, his watch kept time for the beeping monitors, the drip of liquid through a tube, and the whisper of the oxygen pump. When he tried to open his eyes, he saw the machines wink and pop at him, obscene and cheerful beside his bed. The colored lights tracking his heart and breath made him think of Christmas, candlelight, carnival. Then Linus was beneath the baldacchino of St. Peter's, which transformed into a discotheque where Orlando had dragged him. His bed railings shone like silver posts, and his twisted blanket was a thick plush rope separating the ordinary from the VIP. High up, the ceiling revolved in a domed kaleidoscope of green, red, and white starry points, crazed and diffused like confetti in an unseen current. Excited, Linus danced, and felt himself perspire. He felt the music in his bloodstream. Ding, ding, ding. Could someone please tell him the name of the hymn? It didn't matter. He danced and forgot everything. He watched Orlando gyrate and lift a brown vial to his nose. They jumped up and down with arms raised, waiting for manna to drop. Crystal beads of perspiration fell from Orlando's armpits, rolling past the ringed leather harness he had insisted on wearing, down to the wide band of his jockstrap, which rode high above a pair of Celtics uniform shorts, decorated with shamrocks and green piping down the seam, split at his thigh, exposing the bottom strap that curved to disappear into that dark, dark space. Linus swayed in and out for hours, it seemed, between disco and distress, familiar faces jumbled with celebrities he thought had been dead for years. He blinked slowly in the dim light. The room was large, and he was in the farthest corner. All the other beds were empty, stripped bare and arranged in parallel rows. The only doorway was at the other end of the room and was guarded by a red-lit exit sign. Crucifixes hung over every bed, each ivory corpus pinned triumphantly to honey-colored wood. He stretched his neck and looked up at a foreshortened Christ, peering down at him through his toes. It came to him that he was in the old tuberculosis ward at Mercy Hospital.
I think for the queer community, that scene, I think we all lived in several decades. I think we could probably relate to that. But what I think it's special is that we're starting. So what I was discussing with Gerard earlier is that the scene that is so familiar to a lot of us, either just simply went out to the clubs as a part of the community that were existing as a support, or just later on for the generations that didn't have to worry that much about safety, which is for fun. But the book, from that scene where he is trapped between these two realities, Mercy Hospital and this club scene, then transformed to something completely different. This is an opening scene, and then even though we're living a lot of this familiar visions of the club scene, sex, jockstrap, etc. Later on, it evolves into something very, very different than this. We're clearly in the 80s, during the AIDS tragedy, and the characters and the spaces that you built. I wanted to discuss with you, how did you build them in a way that honored the struggle that the community endured in that?
Well, it seemed easy to set it in that decade, since that's the decade that I basically came out and grew up. And so it was a natural fit set it at that time. And I could rely a lot on my own memories for some of the settings and the feelings that go into the scene that I just read, and the sort of the tension between the like excesses of celebration and then the fear of destruction that kind of clashed really in Linus's imagination, or in his dream state that he's going through in that scene.
So one of the things that I mentioned at the beginning is that for minorities like Puerto Rican from Puerto Rico, and Gerard's Puerto Rican from.
I'm a Massachusetts.
I'm a Massachusetts from Massachusetts. It was important to capture that experience through the lens of the family's experience at the church. And there's a beautiful passage that I think captures that really well. I would like for you to read it.
Sure. Sure. This is another a paragraph of explanation or description about what the role of the church could be for someone who is coming from another place and trying to find their way into a new place. And this is Orlando talking about what made religion and religiosity so attractive to him. The special vocabulary, the moody whispered prayers and instructions were to Orlando all signs of an exclusive club, and it began to match his own sense of specialness. Was this his true vocation? He didn't like competition. He didn't like sports. Girls were nice, but nothing special. He liked praying and being kind to everyone because helping others was fun. He loved the Mass and the way it started out happy, then got mysterious and sad, but ended happy again. Looking at the faces of the adults around him, he knew there was a secret here that got told and shared in a way everyone could understand. Alone in an oak pew before the Blessed Sacrament, every creak echoed, and the echo was like applauding angels' wings. All the painted wooden statues of saints, the ones who had stood up to emperors and were tortured in the most incredible ways, roasted alive or eaten by wild animals, so brave for God and so beautiful. All this history was alive and important, a truer history of the world than his own half history of being from the wrong part of town, or being from a tiny island in the sea that was never on the news, way past Cape Cod and the whaling of Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard. Was being part of this greater history what it was like to be a priest?
I wanted to also read another passage in page 21. It starts with Orlando, but also kind of captures that.
Oh, yes. I think I skipped ahead.
You did.
That's okay. Orlando thought of the Peanuts and Alf and romance novels, but his own story went like this. A long time ago, when he was little, God chose him to be a priest. His mother, Socorro, had just lost a baby in a miscarriage. Everyone knew she was delicate, y que ella parecía de nervios. Her sister, Catalina, blamed the breakdowns on his father, Adalberto, the man everyone called Bertin, who never said please or thank you or sorry, and who came and went as he pleased, who worked when he had it, who loved basement cockfights and midnight dominoes. Maybe there was a lot of yelling and crying sometimes, and maybe things got smashed when so much depended on paydays and Canadian Club, or food stamps and Schaefer beer. But hugs and kisses and aunts and uncles always made up for the slaps and shouts. Fathers worked and smoked and drank and fought. Mothers cooked and cleaned and prayed a lot. Girls got diplomas if they were good or got pregnant if they were bad. Boys joined the army, found jobs, went to jail, or escaped inside themselves with drugs. Some went to college.
Exactly. So I think that resonates a lot with same experience that I recall with the experience of a minority, Puerto Rico, but specifically, when they are going to church. And some of those passages that you're reading, some of them echo a lot of some of the work that I read that I've written before. Also, you were talking about the God chose him to be a priest, and so the story is that he's in the high school, right? And that's where Orlando meets Father Linus.
Yes.
And that's basically the core of the story, where you're trying to deconstruct, what is it? Why do parents send their kids to this kind of school? What is the expectation? Why would they want to become priests? And then on the side of the priest, what priesthood means to them. And I want to talk about that a little later, but I also wanted to talk about, so you're going between Massachusetts and Puerto Rico, and that is, the scenery between both places, and within each place is different. How do you build those spaces? And what was some of the experience that you recall to be able to build, or the memories that you used to get there?
Well, I guess I want to start about the place that the settings are all, the starting point for the settings is memory. So I grew up in Western Massachusetts, so it was easy to set it in Western Massachusetts, and I've spent time in Puerto Rico and Boston, so it was an easy way to kind of set the stage for the novel. Could have happened in lots of parts of the country or the world, because even if you look, the Times reported, I think on Monday, that the Diocese of Buffalo, New York, just settled with the Attorney General to allow a government monitor to monitor the way complaints are handled for any sort of child sex abuse by clergy or people who are associated with the Catholic Church. So, I chose a place where I knew what I knew the location and I knew the area. But the idea of building the place was also building around the relationship between the characters, and the characters are very much of the places that they're from. They're all trying some way to kind of raise themselves in some sort of social way through status, like through becoming a priest. They can have a career, they can have financial security, and then there's the religious side of it, where they're serving God and they're kind of being altruistic. But it's a combination of altruism and self-interest that drives all of the characters.
Yeah, in Puerto Rico, it was like, you can either be a priest or a doctor. That's what like my mother used to say. So I wanted to ask you about, so the topic of abuse in the clergy has been written about, obviously. And I wanted to tell us, how is this different? How is your story told in a way that it might be a little bit apart from everything that we've seen before?
Well, what I tried to do, and obviously you're going to decide for yourself whether you think it's successful or not, is the accounts that I was used to reading were, news accounts, and usually they were very crime kind of focused, obviously, because there were crimes that were committed and crimes that were alleged. But what I wanted to do was take a step back and look at the relationship between the perpetrator and the victim, or the priest and the altar boy or the seminarian, and toggle between them, which is what I do, so that you can see both points of view and hopefully make it more complicated in a way, so that it isn't so black and white, although clearly there are offenses committed, but they're each individuals, and they're going through whatever it is that they're going through in particular. There are some really good novels that kind of take take the Catholic Church clergy abuse scandals as a topic. In my experience, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, they've been from the point of view of another family member, sometimes of just the perpetrator, sometimes just the victim, but I haven't seen where it kind of goes back and forth, where you can see the relationship. And in my book, I think what makes it different is that it really does track the relationship over time. And so you really do see the way this particular relationship kind of changes and develops or falls apart.
It starts when Orlando is underage, and then
Yes.
it continues once he's already in college. So it
Yes.
it adds a different component.
Yes.
And it gets it acquires dimension, because then it's not just about them, because they start going to clubs and they start meeting other people that are in the clergy that are gay. So it's
they enter a whole other world,
a whole other world.
and it's a world that it's very closed,
Right.
and to get into it, it's not for everybody. So
And they're handling the trauma differently, because there's guilt on both sides, there's pleasure on both sides, and they're each trying to see, how do I assume this as a guilt, but also how can I exist with it?
yes, they're both trying to figure out how to exist with it. Once they kind of once it starts to sink in, past some of the denial mechanisms,
right,
then they really are in trouble.
I want to talk about Father Linus's how you inhabit his head, because that's the part that I think that we start to see how he justifies his actions while castigating himself constantly, and it lives in that constant paradox. And there's on page 43 you talk about that paradox of forgiveness, how you are forgiven and you can sort of press reset.
Yes. So Linus is thinking about what he should do now that he's starting to sink in that he's in trouble. Maybe he should make his confession to Jean after all. Jean is his superior, or to Higgins, his doctor. Even better. One could be very sinful and God would forgive. Humanity had already been saved, yet God gave man perfect freedom to turn his own way, saved and free to sin again. It was a paradox. The paradox was why he, just a man, as the born-again preacher had described him, could hear the confession of sins and absolve them in God's name. Because God became man in his infinite mercy, he could represent God. What had he done to deserve mercy? The thought occurred to him that he was not as bad as some. There were worse. He knew it. If he repented sufficiently and with perfect contrition, made a good confession, God might forgive him. Let him live and go back to his life, humbled and never more to stray. Oh my God, I am heartily sorry. Linus wiped his eyes and nose. He felt weepy and shrank into himself a little more, feeling small. And then, as the familiar notes of the Gloria began, a bit euphoric, he began to play out a new life, begin as a new man again, in his mind, full of good behavior and good works. Everything was possible with God, and why not?
I want to go into other topics of the book, but one of the things that I really admire about Gerard is just that a lot of us wrote our books as adults. I did a master's degree already in my 40s, and I wanted to be a fiction writer. You did the same thing, and I wanted to talk about how did you find those spaces and opportunities to write a novel, when you're working a full-time job and existing in New York?
Well, I started, as some of you, or probably all of you might know, I started writing this in 2009. And I didn't have a job. And that was part of the motivation to get busy, doing something. But once I started to work, and I basically worked on the weekends, and I'm not a night person, so the early morning or weekends to work on the novel. And I know there are people in the audience who had full-time jobs and had to figure out when to write, right, Lance? Yep. So it's a struggle.
And but you also had, you part of this in Bread Loaf. And
yeah. So I workshopped it at Bread Loaf in 2012, and then in 2015, I got a foundation grant to go to France to Cassis with Mary, who was in here, and she just stepped out to finish the manuscript. So I finished the manuscript in 2015, or at least I thought I did, and kept on working on it for a while longer, and
when did you actually finish it?
What year would I say it was really finished and I didn't do anything more on it?
Well, no.
2020.
That was exactly that would be percent. No, but like, what do you think? Okay, this is like, when did you actually say, okay, this is the book?
Before the pandemic.
Okay. So then, that's a span of like 11 years. So when you would retake the book and you revisit these characters, did they speak to you differently? Did things want to happen differently?
That's a great question. No, I think they were who they were. And I guess I just if anything, I would just discover something new about them, or something different about them. But they always were who they were.
Some of the things that I like about this is that you switch, this narrative styles. Sometimes Gerard goes into this beautiful essay-like paragraphs. As an example, when you talk about priesthood and priesthood that has been in stage, and it's sort of like self-critical in a way. The narrator, it's kind of not objective. Has sort of like a little sassy attitude when he talks about these topics. But you also deal with their trauma using different tools, and then when Linus starts to understand, well, he is actually forced to go to the rehabilitation center.
Right, he goes to a priest rehab.
Right, priest rehab, which is great because I thought when I read, so basically Gerard transforms that instead of just a step or a moment without inside that treatment center. Linus remembers it. He recalls it as a movie that I also almost read it as a kind of like a reality TV show. I thought it was fantastic, and you even used the script of the screenwriting,
right?
Which visually also like transports you and does something else to your brain, right?
Right.
So I wanted to ask you why did you decide that this was a good way to talk for Linus to deal with his trauma?
Right. Well, I've seen that done before, and I really liked that effect of a different typeface and size of the font and all that to kind of just change the scene. And there's a couple things that I can say about it. And you mentioned one of them. So one of the things I wanted to do is get into their self-understanding. So Linus is a priest, and he processes his actions and behaviors through what he's learned about being a priest. And so that's where some of this kind of almost highfalutin self-deception that he goes through about what he's doing. But it's also, I think, theologically correct that he's taught that he's become a different person. Once he becomes a priest, he's not like other people. So there's a tension there between being a priest and being this sort of holy person. And then when he goes to the rehab, to the, well, it's called the Institute of the Holy Spirit. When he goes there, what he's doing, they're using psychology. So there's two modes of self-understanding, you know, the church at that in the scene that I'm going to read you a tiny bit of is trying on for size psychology and like, you know, very rudimentary kinds of concepts that everyone probably here feels like natural to them. But is new in the context of this rehab where the institution is trying to get a handle on why they have all these bad actors amongst them. So what Linus is doing when he is at this program is, for the first time maybe, using different kinds of words to understand what it was that what he's been doing. And it's another clash between these two worldviews. So this is his, you know, his group therapy sharing. The first time it happened was with an altar boy. He was being trained by the pastor, learning his role. You know, naming the sacred objects, the vestments, the proper way to hold the paten, hand posture, genuflection, and things of that nature. The boy was innocent, of course, and I think I'm allowed to say this, beautiful. You could see how beautiful he was. It was in his eyes. He had the pure faith of a child, and it was like a clear light you can't keep from being drawn to. What was it? Was it an angel visiting the earth to give a glimpse of the splendor of his kingdom, or a temptation? Was this good or the glamour of evil I saw? I remember being very confused, but overpowered by a desire to touch and feel this creature standing before me with expectation and trust in his beautiful eyes. He didn't protest or cry. He was meek and mild, like one of Christ's lambs. I wanted to show him how special he was. He said one word, Father. It was a question, I think. This confused me even more because it was as if dare I say it, it was as if he wanted me to. No. I know he did not ask me or invite me. It's just that I've been trying to remember all the details in my individual sessions and things get confused. I know things happen. It was a violation. No right to violate that sanctity which no one has the right to take without asking. And no, now I remember, he didn't ask me or say please. I meant me. I mean I. Even if I were to have asked, it would not excuse. He was a boy, and I am an adult, a man.
In that, so within the treatment center, there are obviously different types of transgressions, and you deal with each one differently. But did you do any reading on those kind of centers before?
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So, I read, obviously news accounts, and I read the John Jay College did a big study. So I read that study on, they did like a national survey of clergy and they asked them all sorts of questions. And so I used some of that. And also, places like this exist. And, you read about them in the news, usually because the offender or the alleged offender, I'm an attorney, so I have to be careful what I say, is spirited away, you know, to these institutes, never to be heard from again. You know, you never, I mean, they might get a secret plane ride to the Vatican, who knows? So I did some research in that sense to kind of figure out, and some of these places have websites, you know, so.
The website for the treatment centers?
I think so. I mean, there might not be a lot of information there, but they
With
do.
the address.
Well, you know, they a lot, you know, people can knock on the door, but you know, that doesn't mean that the person who answers the door is going to be helpful.
No, of course.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking after Pizzagate, who knows where those people are going to end up. Wow, so these are like really moving targets. Well, you know, it's
Yes.
impressive the research that you did to sort of get, because it's not just about the space and what they're doing, and you really get into like there are other abusers there that have, and you know, and again, you know, the language you use, because we're not in a literary space right now, we're in a movie. There's a flexibility in language and how you inhabit each one, and then you know you can hear some of them arguing with one another, and some of them, they have sort of like an attitude of like, well, you know, I'm not doing anything wrong. Some of them have admitted that this is something like Linus is somewhere in the middle,
Right.
but there's each one has a kind of like a gradient of how they feel about why they're there.
Sure. Linus is in a group with another priest who had an adult who had an affair with an adult woman, and they're both in the same group as, you know, sort of equally, you know, culpable for breaking whatever the
Right.
rules
And the
are.
fact that the church would classify it in the same way,
Right.
It's telling, yeah. It is an icky subject. So,
Yes.
how did you feel when you were writing these scenes? I mean, like, I when I read it myself, I thought this is again going between the different characters and what they're experiencing. But I thought this is a great way to inhabit this person's psyche and how they're processing. But I also felt this must have been really difficult to write. Talk about writing about this when you could create such a. I mean, it goes from the guilt of the process to the redemption of forgiveness, and then to doing poppers in a club. You know, so I mean, how did you deal with that?
Well, I think that you just have to accept a lot of variation in people's behaviors, and that people can do really great things and really horrible things, and be the same person can do both of those things. The scenes of where there's abuse were hard to write, and I think one of the things that helped write them was the setting, and trying to maybe make the setting more alive to kind of balance out what was going on between the characters.
Right.
So there's a scene where Father Linus and Orlando, when he's still a teenager, 14, they're in an office in the library of the school, but you can hear the other kids playing in the background outside the window. So it creates the tension and the creepiness.
Right.
But also I hope that, you know, you can see that just on the other side of the wall, maybe there's if he jumps out the window, not literally, but you know, there's safety, or there's a place to escape to, or to find your own people. So
Do you think Orlando had a chance to escape the moment that he walked into the high school?
no. I think his destiny was already written by the sort of the path that had been laid out for him, I think, in the story. Now, what happens to him after is more open.
Of course, and I'm horrible. I always give away the endings, and my husband kills me every time I start talking about this. So I'm just trying not to give away what happens. But
It's not a little life.
No. I did. But when I asked that question, it's because, yeah, I mean, like from the moment that he walks in, it felt like there was this world laid up. Like this is like the parents, I mean, also like the misogynistic father and the bad character. So, trying to escape that world, finding a way to feel safe, and then finding another father figure that is actually, taking him through this. I mean, like he actually even at some point starts college and then he returns. So it's like this like magnetic sort of force that religion has.
Yes.
Once you start in this world, it sort of really stays with you.
It's a magnet, like
it's a magnet. Yeah. And as a very personal anecdote, I was raised evangelical, and when I was 17 or 19, I decided that I just couldn't, because it was either I live with this guilt that's driving me to madness,
it's like life or death,
or and I remember that the biggest fear that they would tell us in church is like, God is coming, and you don't know when he's going to show up, and then you're going to go to hell. So I was like, you know what? And I hope I don't offend anybody. This is when I was 19. I was like, fuck God, fuck religion. I need to live. And then I was driving home, and I'm like, oh my God, what does he come now? If he shows up now. And it's like, well, the Bible says there's going to be trumpets. And I was like, is that a trumpet? But the fear, I mean, and that I lived with that for so many years. So I know that the moment that Orlando walks into that place, he tries, he has a moment which is like, has a life, and he pulls him right back in.
yes. Right.
And I'm not going to talk about what happened later because it's easy to do. But I think one of the greatest assets to me about this novel is language. It's language is gymnastic. It bounces. It travels. And to me, that was a symbolic way of showing that the language has the power to appropriate the trauma.
That's very generous and I hope true. And I was my goal.
It shows. There's a paragraph on page 70 that I wanted to share with the audience, because it's when you talk about how the priest believes that he is the incarnation of Christ on earth. It's so powerful that to me that it's a way of saying, I've understood this and I have it. Language is a way of possessing the past.
And going back to the research question, I did read some theology and some philosophy,
which shows in the
just
book.
sort of to understand, to be able to write this, I had to learn some stuff. Okay. This is Linus thinking to himself. Why do people believe? Linus observed the passion in the eyes of the people. He's watching a television mass. Okay. Linus observed the passion in the eyes of the people as the camera focused on faces in the pews. Hope for good things, a desire for closeness, with their hearts primarily, and sometimes with their intelligence, for those endowed with brains. When his vocation was confirmed by the illumination in the sliver of relic, he had felt blessed. It was simple, beyond logic. A priest was somebody who played an instrumental part. Linus wanted to have a major role, not be a bit player. Ergo, he would become a priest. It all made sense. Plaguing confusions fled, and Linus believed. An actor who doubts is a soul in torment, unable, like the Apostle Thomas, either to believe or disbelieve. but touching and holding, and yes, kissing. The way the gospel is kissed, the way the kiss of peace is shared, makes doubt disperse. The way water loses itself in sacramental wine, and the way an actor's costume becomes himself. No difference any longer, only a seamless garment, a unity. The priest goes up to the altar. The priest ministers, and somehow it happens. It is a miracle of grace, maybe the only one he will ever know, because the priest is both there and not there, inhabiting the role, a nobody who becomes the somebody everybody has come to see. The priest is more than a mere performer. He is Christ's double.
I wanted to know before we move on if there are any questions. I'd like to open it to the audience.
What's about the title?
Oh, the title Homo Novus was suggested to me by a friend of mine, Philippe, who explained to me that in the Roman Republic, when a citizen became a senator, a Roman senator, they would call him a new man or a Homo Novus. And that right was extended to the plebeian class, and then they too could be senators and would also be called new men or Homo Novus. And then St. Paul, who was a Roman citizen, took that concept because as a citizen he understood, civic life in the empire at that time, and extended it to use it as a way to promote equality among all new Christians, so that you were neither patrician or a plebe, and you were no longer a Jew or a Gentile, you were a new man in Christ. And so that's where the title comes from. And that is in something that I just read to, you'll see, that's all these characters want to, in some form or fashion, become new men.
Just a quick question, or comment first. Huascar, poppers can be very spiritually enriching. Depends on your experiences. This idea of redemption, the way this has mainly been handled was by massive denial and massive manipulation by diocese, and I think your book gives a different dimension to Linus. He's not just a monster. He's not just a villain. He's also been violated himself. Can you see some other way to handle? I'm thinking of these ideas of restorative justice that come up, and this whole idea of different ways to handle.
Well, one thing that I discussed, this was a long time ago with a friend of mine who was a victim, survivor, was a sort of a truth and justice committee or reconciliation committee, the way they did in South Africa or maybe other places where it's not a criminal proceeding. Those could be handled separately, but there's a way to have like public hearings where people can both talk about what happened, and also the important part is that the offenders come and they also talk as well and apologize. So that's, I don't think that has happened.
No.
We're in a litigious society.
Any other questions? I have one more question about the female characters.
Yes.
There are not many,
No.
but
Right.
a few are very strong. And I wanted you to talk about Angie.
Yes.
It's such a strong character that comes in, and she's almost like the person who could have saved him from the entire nightmare.
Yes. Yes.
So tell us about Angie.
Angie, in the story, Angie is someone who they went to school together. They're from the same neighborhood, and she's now a police officer. And she picks him up because Orlando's waiting for the bus, and Angie's driving by in her cruiser and sees him and recognizes him and picks him up and drives him back to the rectory where he's staying, and they have a whole conversation about the old neighborhood and how have you been and what's going on, and you know, completely personal questions that only people who know you can ask. And she just sort of came out of the blue, you know, to me. And I mean, it's a male world, you know. Right. This is obviously by definition, so far anyway. Yeah. Only, but she could have. I think you're right. I think she's probably one of the few people in the story with any common sense.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And sometimes, you know, he mentions, you know, Angie in a way that, you know, feels like, what if I had come with Angie instead of returning back to him?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, thank you so much for this book. I know that folks who visit this book are going to stay here for a while. I enjoyed every chapter. I think it's very healing. I think it talks about, again, a very dark subject with a freedom and a beauty, and that it's refreshing. So thank you for coming. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for coming.
And, you know, we'll stick around for a little while. Thank you for everything.
Gerard, I'm guessing you'd be happy to sign some.
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right.